The date is January 3, 2026. A geopolitical earthquake reshapes the Americas. In the pre-dawn darkness of a moonless Caribbean night, the United States military executed an operation that will redefine power in the Western Hemisphere. The target, the core of Caracas. The objective, the extraction of Nicolas Maduro. As sunrise painted the peaks of the Avila Mountains, encrypted signals gave way to global news alerts, confirming what few believed possible. President Donald Trump announced the successful capture of the Venezuelan leader and his wife, Celia Flores, now en route to American territory to face justice. To grasp the scale of this event, one must first analyze the operation itself, for it signals a profound evolution in American military strategy. This was not a conventional invasion. There were no armored columns rumbling across borders, no mass amphibious landings on the shores of La Guaira reminiscent of Panama in 1989 or Iraq in 2003. This was the definitive execution of a leadership decapitation doctrine, leveraging cyber dominance and surgical strikes to paralyze a state before it could react. At approximately 300 local time, a synchronized cyber assault silenced the command networks of Venezuela's integrated air defense system. Russian-made S-300 batteries and coastal radar arrays went inert. In this created window of digital blindness, American stealth platforms delivered precision ordnance to critical nodes. Runways were cratered to prevent fighter intercepts. Communications hubs linking the capital to interior military commands were severed. Fortified positions around the Miraflores presidential palace were isolated. This systemic paralysis enabled the insertion of elite special forces via helicopter into the heart of the urban capital. Globally televised images showed U.S. rotorcraft moving through the canyons of Caracas's distinctive architecture, a raid predicated on velocity, secrecy, and total information supremacy. The target was secured within minutes, extraction completed before loyalist militias or regular army units could mount a coherent defense. The operation transmits a stark warning to U.S. adversaries worldwide. Geographic distance and hardened fortifications are no longer guaranteed shields. American reach, when propelled by political resolve, can penetrate the most guarded capitals. Yet viewing this solely as a tactical victory overlooks the profound significance of its timing. Historians will note a chilling parallel. Exactly 6 years prior, on January 3, 2020, President Trump authorized the Baghdad drone strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, commander of Iran's Quds Force. This repetition of date is not accidental. It reveals an operational psychology favoring the initiation of the political calendar with a decisive, irreversible action. A move that seizes the global narrative and forces both allies and rivals to react to American initiative. This pattern suggests the opening of each year in this presidential term may be a chosen window for resolving long-standing strategic dilemmas. However, the path to this morning of precision strikes stretches back through centuries of turbulent history. To understand the full weight of this collapse, we must examine Venezuela's complex saga, a story of ambition, resource wealth, revolutionary fervor, and its perpetually fraught relationship with the United States. A nation sculpted by geography and fortune, Venezuela occupies the northern crest of South America, a Caribbean gateway of staggering natural beauty. Its territory spans over 900,000 square kilometers, comparable to Egypt or Texas and Oklahoma combined, hosting a population of more than 31 million. This land was the cradle of South American independence, birthplace of Simón Bolívar, the liberator. In 1819, Bolívar forged Gran Colombia, a vast federation uniting modern-day Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador. Though it dissolved by 1830, the dream of a potent, unified Latin American state became ingrained in the Venezuelan political consciousness, fostering a legacy of leaders who saw themselves as Bolívar's heirs, destined for regional leadership. For much of the 20th century, this ambition was channeled into a close, lucrative partnership with the United States. The discovery of colossal oil reserves in the Lake Maracaibo Basin early in the century transformed an agricultural hinterland into the Saudi Arabia of the Caribbean. American oil firms arrived, bringing capital, technology, and influence. Venezuela became a crucial fuel source for the Allied war machine in World War II, and in the post-war decades, a rare stable democracy in a region prone to dictatorship. A founding OPEC member, it used its diplomatic heft to sway global energy markets. By the 1970s, production exceeded 3 million barrels daily, petrodollars flooding into Caracas, financing a skyline of modern towers and highways. But this wealth carried a curse. Monoculture reliance on oil created a brittle economy and profound social inequality. The oil price collapse of the 1980s shattered the illusion of perpetual prosperity. A state deriving over 90% of its revenue from petroleum slashed social spending, poverty soared, and the middle class evaporated. The simmering resentment of these lost decades cultivated fertile ground for revolt. From this soil of despair emerged a charismatic lieutenant colonel, Hugo Chavez. His failed 1992 coup attempt catapulted him to national fame, particularly through a brief televised address where he accepted responsibility, stating his objectives were not achieved, por ahora, for now. Released from prison in 1994, he channeled deep anti-establishment fury into a political movement, speaking directly to the poor, promising to overthrow a corrupt elite and redistribute the nation's oil wealth. His landslide 1998 presidential victory ended the era of cooperation with Washington and ignited the Bolivarian Revolution. Chavez moved swiftly to dismantle the old order. He rewrote the Constitution, founding the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, extending presidential terms, eliminating limits, and consolidating power. His most dramatic shifts were international. He reframed the United States not as a partner, but as an imperialist predator, seeking to build a coalition of anti-American states. He forged a strategic alliance with Cuba, providing over 100,000 barrels of subsidized oil daily in exchange for intelligence, military advisors, and social program support that solidified his control. His outreach extended globally. A visit to Saddam Hussein in Baghdad, breaking Iraq's isolation, courting Iran, inviting investment and establishing direct flights, purchasing billions in Russian weaponry to replace U.S. hardware, and opening the energy sector to Chinese strategic investment. Venezuela under Chavez became a nexus for global anti-Americanism, accused of hosting elements of groups like Hezbollah and supporting Colombian guerrilla movements such as the FARC. Washington watched with escalating alarm as a former ally transformed into a beachhead for rivals. Relations deteriorated rapidly. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration was expelled, accused of espionage. Sanctions targeted Venezuelan officials. Diplomatic rhetoric turned venomous, epitomized by Chavez's 2006 UN speech where he called President George W. Bush the devil, claiming he could still smell sulfur. Despite the political hostility, economic pragmatism briefly endured. The U.S. needed Venezuela's heavy crude, Venezuela needed American dollars. But the seeds of future collapse were sown. Chavez used the oil windfall of the 2000s to fund expansive social missions and buy regional influence while catastrophically neglecting investment in the state oil company PDVSA's infrastructure. He purged experienced technicians, replacing them with political loyalists. Production began a steady decline even as prices soared. Chavez's death from cancer in 2013 left a politically polarized and economically fragile nation to his hand-picked successor, Nicolas Maduro, a former bus driver and union organizer who had served as foreign minister. Maduro inherited the presidency but not Chavez's charisma, and soon, not the high oil prices. The global oil market crash shortly after his inauguration sent the Venezuelan economy into a freefall from which it never recovered. The implosion under Maduro ranks among modern history's worst outside of war. GDP contracted by over 80%. Hyperinflation rendered the bolivar worthless. The monthly minimum wage collapsed to a few dollars. Malnutrition became endemic. The healthcare system crumbled. An exodus of nearly 8 million citizens created a regional refugee crisis. As formal economy collapsed, state criminality flourished. Locked out of legitimate finance by U.S. sanctions, the regime turned to illicit revenue. Washington indicted Maduro and his inner circle for transforming Venezuela into a narco state, alleging high-ranking officials operated the Cartel of the Suns, trafficking Colombian cocaine through Venezuela to global markets. Rampant, destructive illegal gold mining in the Amazon became another cash stream. Politically, the regime hardened into outright dictatorship. After the opposition coalition won a supermajority in the 2015 National Assembly elections, Maduro used a stacked Supreme Court to strip the legislature of its powers. This precipitated the 2019 crisis when National Assembly head Juan Guaido invoked the Constitution to declare himself interim president, arguing Maduro's re-election was fraudulent. The U.S. and nearly 60 other nations recognized Guaido, seemingly bringing the regime to the brink. The Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign imposed crushing oil sanctions and asset freezes. Yet Maduro survived, bolstered by continued military loyalty, economic lifelines from Russia and China, and a fractured opposition. The ensuing years were a stalemate of misery. Guaido's momentum stalled, and he eventually fled into exile. The subsequent Biden administration eased some sanctions to encourage dialogue, but negotiations yielded minimal results. Emboldened, Maduro tightened his grip, arresting activists and barring opposition candidates from ballots. This brings us to the recent past and the return of Donald Trump to the White House. The strategic calculus in Washington shifted decisively. A Russian and Iranian-aligned narco-state in the Caribbean was deemed an unacceptable threat. The flow of drugs and migrants was framed as a direct attack on the homeland. The Monroe Doctrine, asserting U.S. primacy in the hemisphere, was revitalized. Rhetoric sharpened. Indictments were updated. The bounty on Maduro was raised to $50 million. Military presence increased in the Caribbean through exercises and naval deployments. The message was unambiguous. Patience had expired. Diplomacy and sanctions had weakened but not toppled the regime. In the weeks before today's strike, back-channel demands for Maduro's resignation and exile were reportedly issued and rejected. Maduro, believing the specter of a protracted guerrilla war would deter a costly invasion, miscalculated. He prepared for a grand invasion or a blockade. He did not anticipate the surgical decapitation that arrived in the night. The capture of Nicolas Maduro concludes a decade of escalating conflict and failed diplomacy. It marks the end of the Chavista era in its present form. But it is not an ending. It is the explosive creation of a vacuum. And in geopolitics, nature abhors a vacuum. Part II, the aftermath and the dangerous road ahead. The extraction of Nicolas Maduro to the United States stands as a tactical masterpiece for the American military, but it constitutes a strategic gamble of the highest order. We now enter the most perilous phase. The shock of decapitation will fade, revealing the stark reality of a power vacuum. The Venezuelan state, constructed over 25 years around cult of personality loyalty and a privileged Praetorian Guard, has lost its head. The risk of chaos is absolute. Attention must now turn to the internal dynamics of the crippled regime in Caracas. While Maduro faces a federal detention cell, the structures that sustained him remain. The pivotal figure is Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez. In the hours post-operation, he appeared on state television flanked by high command. His tone was somber, controlled. He did not declare war or threaten missile launches. Instead, he urged calm, declared a state of emergency, and called on the armed forces to maintain order and protect sovereignty. This response is illuminating. It suggests a military high command paralyzed by calculation. For years, these generals have prospered immensely from state-corrupted enterprises, oil service companies, food import monopolies, mining concessions. They are not ideologues but businessmen in uniform, their chief motive being self-preservation and the safeguarding of illicit wealth. Fighting the U.S. military guarantees total loss. Negotiating a transition might offer amnesty or comfortable exile. Washington is acutely aware of this potential fracture. The decapitation strategy hinges on the premise that subordinates, once the leader is removed, will seek a deal. Secure communications are almost certainly already open between U.S. officials and key Venezuelan commanders. The offer is straightforward. Facilitate a peaceful transition, marginalize regime hardliners, and avoid sharing a prison block with Maduro. However, the armed forces are not monolithic. While the high command may be pragmatic, the mid-level officers and the paramilitary colectivos represent a volatile wild card. These armed gangs, created by Chavez and empowered by Maduro, are ideologically committed, control sprawling barrios, and are heavily armed. They have little to lose. The nightmare scenario is these factions rejecting the general's orders, igniting a campaign of urban terrorism and insurgency, plunging the country into anarchy and potentially triggering a deeper U.S. ground intervention. Into this volatility steps the opposition's most resonant figure, Maria Corina Machado, the Iron Lady of the anti-Maduro movement. Having endured years of persecution, disqualification from office, and physical assaults, she has emerged as the undisputed moral leader. Following the dissipation of Guaido's interim government, she mobilized the opposition base, campaigning tirelessly for the 2024 unity candidate despite her own banned status. When the regime claimed a fraudulent victory, she refused to concede, maintaining a potent grassroots network. Machado is an unapologetic pro-Western figure. She advocates for free market reforms, privatization of PDVSA, and a total foreign policy realignment away from Moscow and Beijing. Her detailed plan for a first 100 days includes freeing political prisoners, stabilizing the currency, and inviting international investment. But to implement it, she must attain power, a feat impossible without military acquiescence. The U.S. envisions a transitional council, likely comprising opposition figures like Machado, apolitical technocrats, and cooperative military elements. This council would steward a brief period of stabilization leading to free elections, where Machado or a chosen successor would be the overwhelming favorite. This is the optimal path, a controlled demolition of the dictatorship. Yet history warns that regime change is seldom clean. The 2003 removal of Saddam Hussein was swift, but the failure to comprehend Iraqi sectarian dynamics led to a devastating insurgency. The 2011 overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi fractured Libya into enduring militia warfare. Venezuela presents its own complexities, a nation awash with weapons, a porous border with Colombia hosting ELN guerrillas and FARC dissidents who will resist losing their sanctuary, and a population deeply polarized between those celebrating liberation and those mourning an invasion. The geopolitical dimension cannot be ignored. Russia and China have invested billions in loans, military hardware, and energy projects. Moscow viewed Venezuela as a strategic outpost in Americas, near abroad, Beijing as a key resource node. While direct military intervention to restore Maduro is improbable, both powers can act as spoilers. They can veto UN Security Council resolutions legitimizing a new government, launch cyber campaigns to destabilize infrastructure, or provide clandestine support to insurgent factions to make Venezuela ungovernable. Furthermore, the migration crisis looms large. Nearly 8 million have already fled. Renewed violence or prolonged instability could trigger a fresh exodus, overwhelming neighboring Colombia and Brazil, and potentially sending a new surge of migrants toward the U.S. southern border, a crisis the Trump administration is determined to prevent. This creates immense pressure for rapid stabilization, invoking the "you break it, you buy it" axiom of intervention. The United States, by removing Maduro, has assumed ownership of the Venezuelan catastrophe. The economic reconstruction will be Herculean. The oil industry lies in ruins, refineries are crumbling, pipelines leaking, expertise depleted. Restoring production to pre-Chavez levels will require hundreds of billions in foreign investment and a decade of work, yet the potential is enormous. Venezuela still holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, alongside vast mineral wealth. In a stable, law-governed environment, Western energy giants would return. A revitalized Venezuelan oil sector could enhance global energy security and undercut the market influence of rivals like Russia and Iran. This economic future is the carrot dangled before Venezuela's elites and the international community. Regionally, the operation sends shockwaves through Latin America. The forceful reassertion of the Monroe Doctrine will draw condemnation from leftist governments in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and Bolivia, potentially revitalizing anti-American sentiment. Colombian President Gustavo Petro, who sought détente with Caracas, now faces a dilemma between ideological solidarity and pragmatic recognition of the new reality next door. In the coming days, key indicators will determine the trajectory. 1. Military cohesion. Will the high command's hold prevail or will factions splinter? 2. Street stability. Will the colectivos ignite an insurgency? 3. Opposition unity. Can figures like Machado form a credible, inclusive government? 4. International reaction. Will regional and global powers facilitate or obstruct transition? The capture of Maduro definitively ends a personalist dictatorship. But the system he presided over, a deep state of corruption and criminality, remains resilient. The Chavista movement, though headless, commands the loyalty of millions who perceive this not as liberation, but as imperial conquest. Reconciling these two irreconcilable narratives will be the work of a generation. The United States has rolled the dice, betting that a single, devastating strike can succeed where years of pressure and diplomacy stalled. It reflects a leadership style that prizes decisive theatrical action. Yet as the helicopters depart and the adrenaline subsides, the arduous, murky work of nation-building begins. We are witnessing history unfold in real time. Venezuela could emerge as a testament to resolute statecraft, a democratic beacon and economic powerhouse. or it could spiral into a fragmented narco-state and terrorist haven, a perpetual drain on regional security. This operation forces a global reckoning with a renewed, unfettered application of American power, a power willing to transcend traditional norms of sovereignty to achieve its ends. The long arm of the United States reached into the most fortified palace in South America and extracted its prize. The rules have been rewritten. As the Venezuelan people gaze at the skies where the foreign aircraft vanished, they await the answer to a defining question. Have they been liberated, or have they merely exchanged one terrible chapter for another, even more uncertain one? The next pages of Venezuelan history will be written not with ink, but with the fire of conflict and the resolve of those who now dare to hope.